Steel on Steel, John Leffler here with you. But she is being homeschooled, so maybe that accounts for part of it. But what is really striking to me is the more I talk to people in their teens, 20s, and into their 30s, millennial A groups, not as much, but you can see the demarcations between the A's and the B's. They don't seem to understand what the United States is all about. They don't seem to understand what Western civilization is all about. And they think that freedom is a natural thing, that it occurs naturally, rather than having been long fought for and won. And somehow they seem to think that slavery is just de facto wrong without being to account for why it's wrong. So I am concerned about that and wondering if we can reverse that trend. A lot of people are, and people are working at it. Dr. James Duke Pesta is associate professor in English at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and he specializes in, we'll do it in French, Renaissance, prose, and poetry. He teaches 10 courses on topics such as Shakespeare, British literature, and Western literature, and has given 500 talks over the last few years on education reform, Common Core, and the takeover of public education, which I think, having watched this, I'm 68. Can I call you Duke? Is that okay? Instead of
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. I'm 68, and having made the transition all the way from the World War II generation through the baby boomers, which I am, through the other generations, I can see how this whole thing has changed. I'm now horrified at what I see because I don't think a country can survive if we don't understand why Western exceptionalism accomplished more in the area of freedom. Never perfect. Every society has its warts than other societies. And so tell me about your students and what you found in terms of these things.
Well, I think you're exactly right, that there's not a civilization in the history of the planet that can survive, or that has survived, that views its own history, its own ethos, its own identity as primarily hostile. It is amazing how the Western culture, Western nations are going through a kind of cultural suicide where we're teaching our younger generations that there is absolutely nothing redeeming about life in the West. There's nothing redeeming about our history. There's certainly nothing redeeming about American culture, American history, the founders, the founding documents. These have all been traduced on our campuses on the college level for 50 years. And now, with the rise of things like Common Core and the takeover of basic elementary, middle, and high school education by the federal government, now that same worldview is being foisted on kids as young as 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old. The riots on college campuses, and I've been a university professor for 25 years.
Yeah.
The riots and this intolerance on college campuses, I don't know if you saw the article, Claremont McKenna in California, a group of students wrote a long narrative in which they argued that the very concept of truth, right or wrong, objective truth, is a racist, patriarchal Western invention designed solely to keep minority voices quiet and oppressed. So truth on a college campus now is being pegged by these kids who have been taught to believe from the time they were in elementary school. They learn all the warts, all the nastiness. They learn all about American slavery, but they don't learn these things in the context of other nations. So multiculturalism demands that we uphold all non-Western nations. We can't criticize them. We don't have the moral authority to criticize them. It's racist for people of European descent to criticize non-Western nations. So we hold up and praise those non-Western nations. Meanwhile, we focus only on the negative of our culture, and boy, that really has a lasting effect on these kids.
The area that has been interesting for me in the area that you spoke, I think Europe was leading by quite a few decades what I call chewing out its own guts in terms of its own heritage. But now multiculturalism has run rampant through the political system, and it's being confronted by what I call radical Islamism. You know, you have large groups of immigrants coming in who have no intention of assimilating. They have an intention of setting up their own societies within European society. But now they're confronted with a worldview, largely from the Islamic worldview, that is strong, that believes what it believes, and they're flopping around. They can't figure what to do about it because their own principles short-circuit them.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I think that's very well put. And at some level, it's almost now hard to blame the immigrants. For a long time, Western intellectuals, progressive liberals, have convinced our kids and the broader culture at large that assimilation, the idea that people come to this country to become an American, that is now a racist construct. We have demonized the idea for years and years that when you come to America, you speak English like everybody else. All 4 of my grandparents came to this country from Italy, and I never heard a word of Italian in the house when I was growing up because they were committed to me becoming an American. They wanted to become Americans. I mean, let's go one step further. Nobody runs away from their country to this country. Nobody leaves their country to come here because they want to remain where they are. They want to become Americans. They see the promise, they see the liberty, they see the opportunity in this country. The problem is that the academic left, it's intellectual progressives who have convinced Western culture and an increasing number of Americans that our history, our culture is so depraved that we bring immigrants here now to change the culture, not to assimilate to it. This leads to balkanization. This leads to the kind of divisiveness you see now. When we tell people who come to this country that there's no such thing as American identity. American history is simply bigotry and bias. The American founding documents are exercises in oppression. When you tell people that, then these people who come here from foreign countries, they take advantage of what opportunities we've given them, but they preserve their own cultures. They bring with them, in other words, the pathologies of the cultures they left. And there is nothing in America now telling them that, look, we're going to take you in. We welcome immigrants in this nation. We want you to have opportunity, but you have to have some skin in the game. If you don't love America as much or more than long-term Americans do, then the very reasons you came here in a generation will be gone.
I was thinking about Claremont. You mentioned that. They recently had Heather McDonald was going to speak there on a subject, and they actually blocked the hall that she was supposed to speak at, so she couldn't do this, claiming they were fighting fascism. And I thought, strange, you guys look like the brown shirts, but they probably don't even know who the brown shirts were in Nazi Germany.
Well, they don't. And then pretty much a Nazi for the American left is anybody who doesn't agree with your liberal progressivism. That's it. You're a Nazi if you disagree. You're a Nazi if you have a different worldview. And it's amazing to me. You and I both know that colleges have been dominated by liberals and progressives for decades, and yet there are very few conservatives on college campuses. So what's happening? Liberal professors, liberal administrators now are falling afoul of these uneducated kids because they're not liberal enough. So the trap is starting to close. And this is where fascism really takes off, right? When even good old-fashioned liberals are now not liberal enough for these uneducated college kids, so much so that college professors are being driven out of their position. Administrators are being forced to step down because they don't agree 100% lockstep with the radicalism of their students. You see how that great maxim, right, that when they came for the Jews, I said nothing. When they came for the Slavs, I said nothing, until finally they came for me. And so I think even liberals and progressives on college campuses are now falling into the trap that comes from miseducating kids for so long.
Especially when we talk about issues of truth, it's always interesting to take on a millennial. I like to do this, and they say, well, there's no such thing as absolute truth. My first question is, do you believe that absolutely? And so one guy tried to wiggle out of it by saying, well, there's only one absolute truth, and that's that there is no absolute truth. And I said, my next question was, who said? Where did you get this? But they don't understand, if you destroy the nature of truth, you destroy any basis that we have for any kind of rational conversation about anything, because you can always wiggle out of logic just by saying, well, you have your truth, and or that's truth as you see it.
Well, these goofy college kids at Claremont McKenna are typical of the ones I've taught too. Here they are arguing that there is no truth, which means the guarantees of freedom of speech don't matter, and we will shut your speech down if we don't like it, that we don't believe that liberty and freedom go hand in hand with progressive values, and yet as quickly as they deconstruct the truths of Western culture, of Christianity, of conservatism, as quickly as they go about deconstructing those arguments, it never once dawns on them that their arguments are at least as fraught and at least as unprovable as anybody else's. And that, we come back to the word fascism, right? The fascist worldview is one in which my truth is the only truth, and your truth must be punished. And these kids are too miseducated to even realize the irony and the hypocrisy of their own position.
Now, the cure. You have kids that come into the college. I don't know which grade levels you're teaching. Is it possible to deprogram them? I've done a lot of college professors, and that's why I asked this. Some say, like one conservative back in, I think it was North Carolina, said when they come to my class, and he's teaching philosophy, and so I'm presenting views they have never heard before. They got a one-sided diet of information in grade and secondary schools. Is it possible to deprogram? Is it successful?
It is, because I hear that too. As a professor, and I teach everything from freshmen in college all the way to graduate students. So I've run the gamut. And it doesn't matter if the kids are 18-year-old freshmen in college or they're 30-year-old returning PhD candidates. The bottom line is that that's right. They've heard one narrative. And so for me, when kids tell me, you're a great teacher or I love your classes, it's pretty meaningless. The one compliment that I take seriously and the one that I strive to get is when a student will come up to me and say after class, how come no one's ever told me this before? How come I've never heard this before? I mean, let's be very honest here. What we see at Claremont McKenna, what we see with all of this double speak about there is no truth, there are no absolute truths except for that absolute truth, it's all smoke and mirrors. The entire progressive campus argument is not based in critical thinking. It's not based in history. It's not based in logic or philosophy. It's smoke and mirrors. So if I can get kids to listen to me in a college classroom for 6 weeks, I can blow away 25, 30 years of smoke and mirrors because there's nothing to it. You start showing them actual historical arguments. You start deconstruct multiculturalism. Okay, here are America's sins. We can all agree on this, right? Pretty horrible. But now let's look at the rest of the world outside of Western culture. And all these things that you admit no longer are the law in America are still legal in these non-Western countries. And it's sort of, they scratch their heads about this. Wait a minute, you're telling me that there is an active slave trade in Islamic countries? Absolutely. You're telling me that women are treated worse in non-Western countries? Absolutely telling you that. And then you show them the facts. Our kids aren't stupid. They really aren't. They're just tragically miseducated. So if you can get them to sit still for 5 or 6 weeks, inevitably most of them will come back because they just need a model. They need to be told that it's okay to cast off the merely political opinions you've been given in the name of education.
And the only thing you have to have in terms of this, Duke, is the right to say it. And that's where the fight really is, like especially in California, but not just there on college campuses. You have to be able to say it. And that's what they're trying to prevent now, saying, well, if it's fascist, we don't have to even grant it freedom of speech. And you hear this attack on free speech now. This is where I think the war is being fought. And some campuses are succeeding and and others are not.
Well, I think you're right. And when I started graduate school in the late 1980s, this was just all beginning to really, really metastasize. And so what happened is in the late 1980s, these very liberal, progressive young professors were simply demanding that their voices be heard. And so the old senior professors let their voices be heard, and within a generation, all the old guys were forced to retire. All these young progressives became deans and administrators, and here we are 25, 30 years later, and now the voices of tradition and conservatism are completely eradicated on college campuses.
All right, let me jump in here for just a second. We have to do a station break. Dr. James Duke Pesta is my guest right now, associate professor in English at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, and he teaches 10 courses on things such as Shakespeare, British literature, Western literature. We'll be back.